Hi, welcome to GSD Talks. We have a special guest today, and we're going to be talking about security industry and from an E&Y perspective of consulting and transformation in the security industry. We have Brian Allen with us. So Lisa, we also have Lisa Oliveri.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm super excited to be here today and to welcome Brian Allen. So Brian Allen is with EY, but he also has more than 20 years of security experience, and he is an enterprise security risk management expert and has written a book. It's called ESRM, The Concepts and Applications. So congratulations on your book, Brian. Excited to read that. And he's also an adjunct professor at UConn's School of Business. So Brian, without any further ado, we'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. A pleasure to be here. So my perspectives today, I've got to clarify, are mine and not generally EY's. That's the attorney in me.
It's always the disclaimer, right, that comes up. Yeah.
Yeah, my attorney's coming out. So at EY, my main role is we are helping, large and very large corporations work through their security strategies and really evolve security to risk practice. Certainly the cyber side the cyber risks are driving this conversation in a significant way. So we start and build governance models and, risk-based outputs and reports for boards and executives so that, they can find balance in their business when it comes to security and risks and, moving fast and taking advantage of technologies. But it's applying, right? COVID, we've helped a lot of companies and states and organizations, work through the COVID crisis. And, we're seeing organizations take a really close look at security, business continuity, cyber, and start to repurpose a little bit of, what's the role that it's playing? Is it in the right place? Do they have the right support? So it's really a fascinating time. I think we're seeing some really significant transformation. COVID is speeding that up. Yeah. And the executives are having a very different conversation today, and so are the regulators. And I think it's a really healthy time for security in this moment of transformation.
What are some of those conversations you're hearing? Like, what would you say is like the worry? Like, what's the worry from that perspective? Because you're dealing basically with like the CIO perspective, right? And obviously chief security officers, but also the chief information officers as well. Is that kind of...
Actually, so my conversations are mainly with business leaders. Like, of course, the CISOs and the CIOs are engaged, but what is happening there's a real acknowledgement that these are business risks. These are not necessarily technology risks, right? The technology issues are causing business risks. And I think you're starting to see this recognition that, these are really business decisions. And I think that's starting to apply, right? Certainly cyber has driven that conversation. But I think COVID has brought in other aspects, right? Supply chain issues that were not caused by breaches. It wasn't caused by digital disruption. It was caused by, a pandemic event that could also be caused by a mother nature related event, which could also be caused by a geopolitical event.
Right.
Yeah. And what in this conversation, right, in protests and like there's opportunity. And what's happening is that they're talking about business disruption, and, physical security events could cause that. Crisis management, crisis events through mother nature could cause that. Geopolitical events, climate change, and certainly technology. And I think, one of the big stresses that we saw during COVID is, the supply chain, right? The economy has been moving with digitalization. We've become more effective and efficient, and we've centralized things, and we've been pushing deep into technology, into business. And then COVID happened, and it put stresses it stressed the environment. Yeah. And it really kind of brought out some gaps. And, and that's where, obviously businesses had to respond immediately, and they did. And then once things started to settle, and certainly now we're, 8 months into this, they're starting to look at, one, how do we respond? Two, how do we sustain? And now they're coming out and saying, how do we transform, right? We've learned a whole bunch. We've seen crisis. The business models have changed. The markets have changed. And they're looking forward. And we've been helping a lot of corporations look at their holistic security programs to say, what is the purpose here? Like, what's the role it plays?
So what you're hearing from them, it sounds like, is that they know they found the gaps. Now at this, I'll say at Q3, Q4 2020, it's time to figure out the path forward to solve the gaps.
I would go beyond that, right? I mean, I think companies they've fixed their gaps today. You had to survive.
Yeah.
But we are in transformation, right? And they're in transformation mode. And they've been doing this for 4 months now of how do we come out of this a different company than we went into this?
Yeah.
And, and a lot of that, again, right, digitalization, we're at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution of digitalization. We're here.
Yes.
We're at the beginning of it, right? And this is different than information technology. And it is causing, companies to look at every function within the department. They're edging into different markets. And that is causing different business models and different speeds of business and disruption within the business that they're okay. Like, they want to take risks. They have to take risks. They have to go fast.
Right.
And, but they also are saying, how do we find, this balance of going fast and protecting ourselves? And so it's that kind of purpose that they are, looking at. Clearly, they're looking at cyber through that lens. COVID's caused them to look at business continuity that lens. And I think some of the supply chain, geopolitical issues, some of the Mother Nature related events are causing them to look at some of the physical security issues, the protests that have occurred. And so, they are taking a step back and looking at this in a different lens. And I think it's very healthy for our industry.
Sounds like it's going back to the ever consistent term that comes to our mind is the ESRM, right? The holistic thought of what's happening and what is the risk and how can we evaluate it and get ahead of the ball.
Yeah. Security is a risk practice. It's what it is. It's what it always has been. It's what it always will be. It's a risk practice, right? And this is really, they are now acknowledging that it has to mature in its risk practice.
So it's good for the industry. I mean, that's a positive thing that we
100%.
can expect. Good.
100%. I love where this conversation is going. It's finally bringing the executives into this space, right?
Yeah.
You can only push the boulder uphill so much when you're like, hey, we're moving. We want to do this. We want to help engage. But when the businesses start saying, hey, inform us, like there's stuff going on and we're seeing disruption, keep us informed so we can make good strategic decisions.
Yeah.
When they start asking those questions, we're in a good space. We're in the early stages, but we're in a good space.
That's great.
Thanks for sharing those thoughts, Brian. It's really interesting, and I think that's a great perspective, and I'm really glad that you lifted those things up. And speaking about disruption, Brittany and I have been talking with young professionals who have either just graduated or they're really looking to break into the security industry. They're trying to figure out what to do next. Much of the workforce around the world is working from home right now. So there's a whole bunch of different challenges to professional development and just making decisions about what do I do next? How do I embrace the changes that we've seen in response to COVID-19, how it's changing the industry and different company responses and hiring? So I think one of the questions that we really wanted to get your perspective on today is, what is your best advice to young professionals who are either looking for a certification, experience in actually going out and getting a job in this climate, or just pursuing additional higher education? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that, and we can dive deeper a little bit.
Yeah, awesome question. I'll share. So I teach enterprise risk management at UConn's MBA program. And
Look at you go. That's awesome.
It's fun. It's fun. It's fun.
You're in the weeds of it daily then.
And so I taught a class last night from 7 to 10, and we're one of their last classes in their MBA careers, and so we spend a lot of time talking about your career. What do you do? What's next? How do you go about it? And what's changed in this environment? And I share a story about, so one time we posted, when I was at Time Warner Cable, we posted a job for a director position. We got about 500 applicants.
Oh my God.
And, and the recruiters brought us, 4 people. And out of curiosity, I went to them and I said, hey, how'd you get to those 4 people? And they said, well, we took 25 and we broke it down and we looked at these certain things. We interviewed a handful of folks and here's your 4. And so I tell my students, I said, look, you could have the best written resume. You could have it professionally written, but 475 of those folks never even had it looked at.
Yeah.
So how do you get your resume looked at, right? And that is where you really have to distinguish yourself. You have to, networking is critical. If you had a friend that worked at the company, at Time Warner Cable, and you said, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you put in a good word in and just ask him to look at my resume? You have a much better chance of being one of those 25 and not the 475. A much better chance. Whether it happens or not, it's a different story. There's no guarantee you're going to get the job, but at least it'll be looked at, right? And that to me is massive. You're going to have 4 or 5 careers in your lifetime. And, you have to kind of build that network and that skill sets. And so it's not just, your network. And one of the questions that students ask today is like, how do we, build our network today when we're not in person and we're not doing these things? We're just talking about GSX and we miss the people interaction and
Right.
seeing everybody. But you can, right? You can
Totally
see an event like this and reach out and, connect with me on LinkedIn and say, hey, that conversation was really boring. I learned nothing and, I'd love to connect, right? Like that, you could do that. And then all of a sudden, like the reason we have these conversations is to have dialogue.
right.
Right? It's about dialogue. It's not this one way, I know everything, here you go. It's a perspective. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And so engage, right? And you can do that. You can read an article and connect with the author on LinkedIn and build that way in this time. And I think that we're going to see that moving forward. With education and certifications, so when I was a CSO, I got 2 certifications after that. And you do it because it's a commitment, right? It's a commitment to kind of learning. It focuses your attention to something that you didn't learn, you need to grow. It's important. It sets a tone. It tells people you're committed to your career, to betterment. It's a good example in leadership to, your employees that are watching. And I think, specifically today with the cyber environment, the cyber community, the IT community in particular, develop their career sets through certifications. And, it is a great way to kind of expand, but have a roadmap, right, of what you want to do and, and build towards that. It's not going to guarantee the job. And, it sometimes, it looks excessive on your name play. I get it, but it is.
It's like this long sometimes. These people. I mean, it's crazy.
I know. But it's a commitment, right? And I think that's a really healthy. It's a really healthy, statement.
And it's a commitment to learning and to not stop learning. And I think that's really important too for a lot of people that I know in the industry and not in the industry, is that if you're not continuously learning, you will fall behind without even realizing it, right? And I'm trying to teach that to young people as well, even the ones I work with, is that you really, really need to commit to learn something every single day, even if it's small.
Yeah.
Even if it's replacing your water heater, like go watch YouTube videos about how to replace your water heater, because you never know when that's going to come in handy, right?
Yeah.
It's true.
Funny story, just off the side. I had somebody come over and fix my shower door, just wasn't moving right, and he's like, he comes over and he's like, hey, you just have to correct this screw, and he's like, you want me to show you? I'm like, no, that's not the one thing I wanted to learn. He's like, no, it's just you just have to adjust. I'm like, I'm okay. Like, I'll call you back.
Oh my God.
There's other things I want to learn. So to
Yeah.
your point, like, yes, focus, like have a path, like a career path of like
The roadmap, right?
Yeah,
Have a roadmap and the timeline.
Yeah,
And
fixing the shower door isn't one of them.
oh yeah, the shower door is not the example, right? But it's true, because the other thing is that I've noticed a lot of people that I talk to who are I'll say rock star level, right? Like they're the go-getters of the world. And they're actually disappointed in themselves because they're like, I was so strapped at work, I didn't finish this program. and I'm terribly disappointed in myself. And it was like, I get that, but there's also this other side of 2020 was crazy for everyone.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Just, you're going to finish. You're going to be fine. Just take a step back, take a breather. You're not the world's not disappointed in you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Think about it too, like we say you're going to have multiple careers in your lifetime. So it's really about the foundation, right? The foundation of your skill sets, your knowledge, your experience, right? And even looking at like, what does that apply to? And, so Time Warner Cable was bought by Charter and just could not get on the same page as the CEO and walked away. And, and I had a career coach at the time that I was in touch with, and he really kind of brought some perspective that I thought was very interesting. So he's like, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a chief security officer at a telecommunications company. And then we walked through it, and he said, well, we had 200 and something employees. We had $100 million budget, right? And he's like, so we had a P&L. I did some regulatory stuff with some government policy. And he's like, okay, well, look, one, you're a businessman. Two, you do risk management. Your risk skill sets apply to these things. You're in a technology company. And he kind of walked through, and all of a sudden, like that, oh, I do security for telecom was, oh, and risk management. Oh, and business. Oh, and human resources. Oh, and you're a leader. And right, and all of a sudden, that resume and the opportunities grow. And I think, certifications and education can do the same thing for you, where, you have this, well, I do physical security. Okay, that's good. You know what? Every piece of physical security today is networked. So learn some networking. And all of a sudden, you do networking, right? And you have that kind of opportunity to keep expanding up, what your value and your marketplace. And you can do it. That doesn't happen overnight, right? That is
right.
That is a journey. Your career is a journey. Your multiple careers are a journey. And I think that's, the certification conversation, education, right? Getting your MBA. I was asked twice in the past month with some mentees, should I get my MBA? And I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, what's the value in the back end? But you have to look at it long term, right? Does it get you down that roadmap? Does it get you where you need to be? I will tell you, I got my law degree at night. It has paid itself over 50 times because there's no way it opened up doors. It opened up pay scales, right? Yeah. Was it expensive early in my career? Heck yeah. And it was painful to pay that off. I put it into like a 30-year mortgage over time. But all of a sudden, your pay scale starts going up and you're like, oh, $200 a month for 30 years? I got that. That's nothing. That's a dinner.
Right.
Yeah. and that, but it's got to be this long-term view. But when you're, young in your career and you look at, holy cow, it's going to cost me $70,000 or $40,000. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Sure. But, grow that out of your earnings and costs in 30 years.
And like, I used to work for companies too, and now I'm a business owner, but I used to work for companies that had reimbursement programs. And you honestly don't work at companies forever that have reimbursement programs. Eventually, you've gotten to a place where either you're not going to get that certification or education, whatever, or you should take advantage of it. If they have it, use it, because that doesn't last forever. And I don't think it will. I personally don't.
It's free money.
Yeah.
Brittany. And I say the same thing to people about professional development dollars. If your organization is offering some sort of allocation for you to, do some sort of professional development, then if you don't use it, you're leaving it on the table. And I feel like that's such a missed opportunity.
Absolutely.
But Brian, I really appreciate what you were just saying. And I agree with you 100%. And I think you lift up a really important point, which is that the finances and the reality of young professionals in particular who can go out and actually commit to and pay for a program, it can be something that I think is it can be limiting. And so I think having this conversation and just admitting that you might have to be creative to find different ways to invest in that is really important. So I'm really glad that you lifted that up today, because not everybody's situation is the same. I would also encourage people to look at various scholarships through memberships like ASIS and SIA, et cetera. So any sort of road or path that people can take to offset the cost of that to make it a reality, I think is hopefully, something to keep in mind.
So I'd be remiss to say I'm the president of the ASAS Foundation last year and in this upcoming year. We give out scholarships all the time. You make a great point, like reach out, but you've got to do that. Like you own this, you own your networking, you own these efforts, right? This is like, you own your career. That is your job. Like, yeah, your boss owns your immediacy of like today and tomorrow. Yeah, I get that. But you own the trajectory of your career and like opening those doors and kind of advancing. That's yours.
Yeah.
Just one thing that was, a student brought up a question. It kind of just went through my head about, like how do you network outside of, right, like going out and about. And I think trade organizations like ASAS, right? You could belong to ASAS. And there's other opportunities besides certifications like we were just talking about.
Right.
If you were to show up at your local chapter and offer to hand out badges or, take coats at the door, right?
Or take meeting minutes.
Yes. So
they want someone to take meeting minutes all the time.
Yeah. So now if you just, connected with the chair of that chapter, if you had a job and you did a good job and you can reach out to that chair has tons of connections. Right. And so you now just grown it exponentially by going and connecting, taking meeting minutes. Yeah. So there is tons of opportunity. I get that, sometimes, certifications get expensive, the training get expensive, right? The boot camps can get expensive and maybe you can't complete it without going through a boot camp, right? But chapters have offerings. There are scholarships, but there's other ways to do it too. And I think, connecting with, getting out of your comfort zone, connecting with these kind of trade organizations, groups like this, right? We have another organization called the Global Security Risk Management Alliance. The reason we started that was simply every time we talked about security risk, we all got smarter. And so all it is just connecting, sharing ideas and opinions and podcasts. That's all it is, right? But there is opportunity. And I think, young professionals, it's an ownership thing, right? Yeah. You've got to get outside of your comfort zone in some aspects. And yeah, it's extra work. But look, you've got a job and you also have and I would also say, look, there's block some hours for your career, which is different than your job. Right? Just block a couple hours, whether that's, going in and looking at your notifications in LinkedIn and saying happy birthday to somebody and saying congrats on the promotion and reading the article and saying, hey, nice article, just thinking about you. You do 20 minutes, 15 minutes a day over a cup of coffee, right? You sustain those relationships and it can be very powerful.
Brian, I'm so glad that you said that because I was thinking to myself as you were sharing that, I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I'm not really extroverted and I'm not really comfortable just cold calling someone or reaching out. But I think you bring up such a good point about the chapters and finding even one or two people who have an interest in studying for a certification. And even if you make your own cohort, there's so much exchange and I think vulnerability that you can open up and just be yourself and get to know people like that. And then I think that will also be a lasting relationship. I know that's been the case for me, that not only do I feel like I can reach out to those people that I studied with for professional reasons, but also on the personal level to have that camaraderie is really, really nice. And I think that's been a real lasting benefit for me to go through some of these certifications and studies. So thank you for lifting that up.
Yeah. One other piece, if I could, like career-wise, and I'm just going to show my class this recording tonight. We're going through an hour of class. So we talk about these things in networking. And one of the things we talk about is mentoring. Like, how do you I still have a mentor today, right?
Me too.
Yeah.
I have 3 of them.
Good.
More the merrier. Yeah.
You need perspective. You need somebody from the outside to tell you, look, you live in a bubble sometimes if you don't, right? Have somebody kind of sharing their perspective of what they're perceiving. And, how do you find one? And what's the way to approach one? Have a start and an end, right? Have some commitments, right? Know what you want to get out of it and don't make it endless. And, know that I'm busy, right? But if you approach, right, you can't tell classes and all the time, look, approach somebody and say, look, this is where I am in my career. I would love to meet 3 times, and I want to do this 1, 2, 3 things, these 3 conversations. Can we meet for a half hour, over the next 3, 4 months? That's easy. That's easy for me, right?
Yeah.
But if you come up and you're like, hey, I need a mentor, right? Do not waste my time, right? You're not committed. You're not clear. You're not ready.
No.
And I can't tell you how many times like that happens and somebody comes up and they're like, hey, do you have a mentor? And I'm like, no, I don't have time for that. But if they would have changed their conversation and brought something forward and say, I want to accomplish this in the next 3 months, it's easy.
It's a polished ask, right? It's polishing the ask and having a plan behind the ask with a real critical, very, detailed, lined out, here's what I need and here's what I'm willing to. And I always think mentorship and menteeship is actually mutual, right? And even if it's, I would love to pick your brain once a month for 30 minutes and I'm going to buy you a coffee. Mm-hmm. Whatever that is, right? But it does need to be mutual, too. I think as the mentee, they need, you need to somehow pay for that in some, virtual currency.
Yeah, it could be through your network, right? You're growing in a career space. I want to connect with you. I've reached out for colleagues that have worked for me before, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing, right? Is there an opportunity for us to work together? By the way, I'm on the market looking for a position. If you see anything, keep your ears open, right?
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, so it goes both ways. There's no doubt. But it can't. The mentoring piece can't be burdensome, right? I think that's the key. And I think if you approach it, way too open-ended, or there's no commitment on your side of what you want to accomplish, it's a big turnoff of just not, I'm busy, right? I'm really busy. You approach me right and I can help you, and I'm all open ears. And but there's a big difference between the two. But there's finding a mentor, finding somebody that's realistic, right? Coming into the industry, don't grab a CSO, grab a manager, right? Grab your next level up, two levels up, but don't, right? It's there's only so much value that you'll get out of that anyway. Right. But always keep looking for the next one. Like your last conversation with the mentor should be, hey, can you point me to somebody else that could bring me to the next level? Right. Who's my next mentor? Do you have anybody in mind? That should be your last question. And then move on to somebody else. And you'll always have a friend for the rest of your career anyway. So
valuable. So valuable. Good job.
We went way off topic, I think.
I know. We did, but I think it all went together, really. I mean, don't you think, Lisa?
I do. And I also think that when we were talking about the networking piece and networking in the virtual environment, I think there is, even though there's an aversion to getting on video and video fatigue, I think it is really important if you jump into one of those that you actually turn your video on. I've been in networking situations where people just dial in, and it is so hard to engage. And I don't know how much they're really getting out of that. So that would be another thing I'd say, lessons learned, especially in times of COVID. If you engage or you decide that you're going to jump into one of these networking opportunities, go in, jump in, both feet, turn your video on, and try and engage. And, I think that will build relationships. I don't know if Brian and Brittany, you've realized that too.
100%. I was going to say, even with clients or other meetings, right? You notice those now that if it's not visual and you're not speaking to someone, it's kind of strange, which was not the way this was in January 2020, right?
Yeah. Okay, and just know too, some days it's okay to keep your camera off, right? Like everyone's got a bad day, it's fine.
Like Brian didn't do his hair.
I get bad hair days, like it's humid and done. And, and that's okay, but I agree. I'll share one quick story about, Ray O'Hara, who's just an icon in our industry.
He is.
I was with Ray one time, and like my idea of networking, I'd like to meet we're in a crowd. I'd like to grab a beer and sit in the corner and just have a one-on-one conversation. I was doing that with Ray, and he's like, "Do you know that person over there?" And I said, "No." He said, "Go talk to them." And I really didn't want to, and I did, and I made a lifelong friend. And, it kind of started pushing me outside of the comfort zone. And in a way, I think the video component and diving in and engaging with, speakers offline and authors offline is the same kind of thing, right? It's just, yeah, it's uncomfortable at first. Now I don't mind it. And I actually, when I see somebody new, sometimes I'll walk over now and say, hey, I'm Brian. How you doing? What's happening today, right? That's easy stuff. And look, a lot of times it's bad conversation and you walk away. That's it. It's all good. but most of the times it's really good, right? At a minimum, you made a connection, connect on LinkedIn. You never know. And
you never know.
You never know. And it's a comfort thing sometimes, and you got to push yourself out. And I'm really thankful for Ray and him making me do that, because it changed my career. And I've met people I never would have. I hired people I never would have met. They've made me better in the career. They've made my department better. And, you're not on a pedestal because of you, right? You're on a pedestal because everyone around you is doing great. And you don't do that unless you're meeting good people and like reaching out and broadening the network and giving opportunities.
Well, and full circle, Brian, to your comment right there, that's actually how this GSD kind of thing got started. Is I literally looked around and I'm like, who are these really smart people around me? They're everywhere, right? It's like, let's just get together and have a coffee, because I can only imagine what will combust in the world when you get that many smart people together, right?
Yeah.
So no, it's a thing. You need to surround yourself personally with good people. You need to surround yourself professionally with rock stars. I really believe that.
Yeah, you got to find them.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes you're not gonna be on the same page with everybody, but a perspective is a perspective, and it'll change yours. And right, and that's, I think, when you start sharpening that. And we are always in an evolving state. Our industry is, and I mean, every industry is. I think we would, sometimes I think the speed of transformation that we talked about, I don't think the security industry, specifically the traditional security industry, is moving fast enough.
Right.
I just don't think it is. I think we would have our heads in the sand to think that our industry is not going to deal with transformation at the pace that everyone else is. It's eventually going to come to us, right? It's just technology is changing things, the pace of business is changing things, the expectations are changing things. And, with that, the industry has to change fast, and individuals have to change fast. And you got to be nimble, and, these changes in perspectives and listening and, and look, even, talking about it, I've learned from speaking today, right? And there's some things that my perspective has changed because it never came out of my mouth before. And if you went back and looked at this, I'd probably tell you I was wrong on certain things tomorrow. That's not a bad thing. Yeah.
No, I can't thank you enough, Brian. I think that this was not only obviously educational, but you are one very inspiring person in this industry. The first time I ever met you, I'll never forget it, because you walk away. It's one of those people you walk away from a conversation with and you're like, wow, that was like really great.
I appreciate that.
So thank you for being an industry inspirer, and thanks for talking today with us on GSD Talks.
You're welcome. I'm inspired by the young professionals and where we go and all the good people we meet. It's just fantastic. There's so much value in this. So thank you for the time and really appreciate it.
And that's it, everybody. Brian Allen with GSD Talks.